for the public's help and the media's help in locating Ana Walshe. At this point, it's a missing person investigation. We have nothing to support anything suspicious or criminal.
The last night of the year was supposed to feel ordinary. In Cohasset, Massachusetts, the air was brittle with cold, the kind that stings your lungs when you step outside. Christmas lights still glowed along quiet suburban streets. Inside homes, families lingered over leftovers, children drifted between toys and television screens, and the promise of a new year hummed softly in the background. Inside one of those homes was a woman who, by all appearances, was living a life carefully constructed. A mother of 3 young boys, a professional who moved between 2 cities, a wife trying to balance distance and domesticity. Her name was Ana Walshe. By the time the calendar turned to January 1, 2023, she would be gone. And what began as a missing person case would slowly unravel into something far darker. This is Case Note Studio. We document real criminal justice cases, examining the evidence, the decisions, and how the system reached its outcome. A story of digital footprints, shifting timelines, and the quiet spaces where truth disappears. But on that final evening of December, none of that was visible. There was only family, only routine, only the illusion of normalcy. And the question that would come later, the question that still echoes, is this: at what exact moment did the new year begin to feel like the end? Ana Walshe was 39 years old. Friends described her as polished, driven, and fiercely devoted to her children. She worked in real estate development for Tishman Speyer, a prominent firm based in Washington, D.C. Her career required long stretches away from home. During the week, she stayed in Washington, returning to Massachusetts to spend weekends with her family. That commute had become part of her life, the constant back and forth between professional ambition and motherhood. It was demanding, it was expensive, it was exhausting. But by outward measures she was succeeding. She and her husband, Brian Walshe, lived in Cohasset with their 3 boys, all under the age of 6. Their home sat in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where neighbors know each other's routines, where children's voices carry across backyards, where a missing person stands out quickly. Yet no one reported Ana missing on January 1st, or January 2nd, or even January 3rd. According to Brian Walshe, Ana left their home in the early morning hours of January 1st to catch a rideshare to Logan Airport. She was scheduled to fly back to Washington earlier than planned due to what he described as a work emergency. He said she departed before dawn, around 4 o'clock or 4:30 a.m., carrying a small bag. There were no confirmed witnesses who saw her leave. No rideshare driver who publicly corroborated the pickup. No security footage immediately showing her at the airport. Still, in the first days of January, nothing seemed urgent. Brian told investigators he had been home with the children. He reported that he had taken one of the boys for ice cream on January 1st. He said life continued. It wasn't until January 4th that Ana was officially reported missing.
In locating Ana Walshe. At this point, it's a missing person investigation. We have nothing to support anything suspicious or criminal.
The report did not come from her husband. It came from her employer. By January 3rd, Ana had not appeared at work in Washington. She had not responded to emails. She had not checked into her apartment there. Colleagues grew concerned. Attempts to reach her went unanswered. Eventually, her workplace contacted Brian. He told them he believed she had traveled back to D.C., but she never arrived. When authorities finally began looking into her disappearance, the timeline already felt fragile. Why wait several days? Why assume she was fine without hearing from her directly? In interviews, Brian said he had not been worried. He suggested that their marriage was solid. He described Ana as independent and capable. Yet investigators began to notice small inconsistencies. Ana's phone last pinged near their Cohasset home on January 1st. After that, it went silent. There was no verified activity in Washington. No confirmed boarding pass scanned at the airport. No surveillance footage publicly confirming her presence at Logan. Search teams began combing the area around the family home. K-9 units, state police, divers checking nearby waters, news helicopters hovering overhead. The story quickly attracted national attention. A mother missing, 3 young children at home, a husband with a prior federal conviction for art fraud, awaiting sentencing at the time of Anna's disappearance. Brian Walshe had previously pleaded guilty in a federal case involving the sale of fake Andy Warhol paintings. He was on home confinement as part of his release conditions. That detail shifted the atmosphere. Home confinement meant limited movement, structured oversight, electronic monitoring. Investigators began reviewing his activity logs. They began examining surveillance footage in nearby areas. They started asking questions that were no longer routine. Anna's friends described her as meticulous, organized, attached to her children. It was unlike her, they said, to vanish without contact. She had plans. She had responsibilities. She had a life in motion. And yet the days stretched on. January 5th, January 6th, January 7th. No confirmed sightings. No financial transactions in her name. No verified communication. The public messaging from Brian shifted subtly over time. In early statements, he emphasized that he believed she had gone to Washington. Later, he acknowledged uncertainty. He appeared emotional at times. At others, distant. Investigators searched the home. They removed items. They sealed off portions of the property. Each development intensified speculation. But law enforcement remained cautious in their language. At that stage, Ana Walshe was still classified as a missing person. Then came a detail that would begin to change everything. On January 8th, authorities arrested Brian Walshe, not for murder but for misleading investigators. According to prosecutors, he had provided false statements about his movements on January 1st. Surveillance footage, they alleged, showed him visiting a Home Depot store in Rockland, Massachusetts, purchasing cleaning supplies.
Walshe, wearing a black mask and surgical gloves, is seen on surveillance video at Home Depot in Rockland.
Items that included mops, buckets, tarps, and other materials. The timing was significant. If Ana had left the house at 4 a.m., why would he be buying such items later that day? Prosecutors stated that he told investigators he had only left the house to get ice cream for his son. The surveillance footage, they claimed, contradicted that account. The case was no longer simply about a missing woman. It was about a husband whose timeline did not align. The arrest sent shockwaves through the community. Neighbors who had watched search crews work outside their homes now faced a new possibility, that the answers might not lie in nearby woods or waters, but inside the family's own house. Still, no body had been found. No confirmed crime scene had been publicly disclosed. Ana remained missing. And yet, something had shifted. Investigators began examining digital devices seized from the home. Phones, tablets, computers. They looked at search histories, location data, online activity. What they reportedly found would transform the narrative from troubling to chilling. But at this stage, in those first 10 days of January, that information was not yet public. All anyone knew was this: a mother of 3 had disappeared without a trace. Her employer had been the one to raise the alarm. Her husband's statements were under scrutiny, and law enforcement was widening its lens. The image of that New Year's Eve, the lights, the children, the ordinary domestic scene, began to feel like a still photograph from a different life. In the quiet of the investigation, a larger question took shape. If Ana never made it to Washington, then where did she go? And if she never left Cohasset that morning, what really happened inside that house before dawn? As forensic teams continued their work behind closed doors, investigators uncovered something on a seized device, something that would soon be read aloud in open court. A series of digital searches, typed into a computer. In the early hours of January 1st, searches that would not only contradict the story of a simple departure to the airport, but suggest that the new year had begun in a way no one could have imagined. The case was about to turn, and the disappearance of Ana Walshe would no longer be defined by absence alone. Before the search party stopped combing the woods, before the headlines shifted from missing to something far heavier, there was a courtroom moment that changed everything. A prosecutor stood and read aloud a list of internet searches. They were time-stamped in the early hours of January 1st. How long before a body starts to smell? How to stop a body from decomposing? How long does DNA last? How to dispose of a 115-pound woman's body? The words did not echo dramatically. They were not shouted. They were read calmly, methodically. But they altered the atmosphere of the case in an instant. Because if those searches were real, and prosecutors said they came from a device inside the Walshe home, then Ana's disappearance had not been sudden or mysterious. It had been anticipated. According to authorities, the Google searches were conducted from Brian Walshe's son's iPad in the hours after midnight, while the rest of the house was presumably asleep. Prosecutors alleged that the searches began shortly after 12:55 a.m. and continued through the early morning, the same morning Brian claimed Ana left for the airport. That timeline reframed everything. If Ana had been preparing to leave for Washington, why were those searches being made inside the house? And if she was already gone, why would someone be researching decomposition and body disposal before dawn? The prosecution's emerging theory became stark. Ana never left the house. They alleged that she was killed sometime after midnight on January 1st, inside her Cohasset home. But allegations are not proof. And at this stage the case still had no body. No confirmed cause of death. No eyewitness account of violence. What it had were fragments. Fragments investigators began piecing together. Authorities expanded their search beyond the Walshe home. Surveillance footage showed Brian Walshe traveling to multiple trash disposal sites in the days following Ana's disappearance. Prosecutors alleged that he made trips to dumpsters in Abington and other nearby towns, not as part of routine household errands, but in what they characterized as a deliberate effort to discard evidence. Investigators recovered items from those dumpsters. Among them, according to court documents, were trash bags containing what authorities described as blood-stained materials: a hacksaw, a hatchet, cleaning supplies, towels, a pair of sneakers. Most disturbingly, prosecutors stated that some of the items tested positive for blood that matched Ana Walshe's DNA profile. The case was no longer abstract. It was becoming physical. Forensic teams examined the Walshe home more thoroughly. They reportedly found blood in the basement area. Prosecutors alleged that attempts had been made to clean it. That bleach and other cleaning agents had been used. Brian Walshe had purchased cleaning supplies on January 1st, according to surveillance footage. That purchase was no longer a minor inconsistency. It was central. The prosecution began outlining a narrative built on digital footprints and physical traces. They alleged that after killing Ana, Brian spent days dismembering and disposing of her body. The words were clinical in court, but they were devastating in implication. Yet even as prosecutors presented these allegations, one fact remained unchanged: Ana's body had not been found. The absence complicated everything. Without a body, there was no medical examiner's report detailing cause of death. No definitive timeline based on forensic pathology. The case would rely heavily on circumstantial evidence: digital searches, surveillance footage, DNA analysis, and behavior after the fact. And behavior in this case was under intense scrutiny. Financial tension emerged as a possible motive. Brian Walshe was awaiting sentencing in his federal art fraud case at the time of Ana's disappearance. Court records indicated significant financial strain. Prosecutors suggested that Ana had been the primary breadwinner in the household. They pointed to life insurance policies and mounting pressure as possible contributing factors. They also referenced alleged marital conflict. In court filings, prosecutors suggested that the relationship had been strained, citing arguments about finances and future plans. But here again the distinction is crucial. Prosecutors presented these tensions as part of their theory. The defense has not conceded motive, nor accepted the prosecution's narrative as fact. What the public saw was a portrait of instability beneath the surface of suburban normalcy. And with each new revelation, the emotional stakes rose. Approximately 2 weeks after Ana was reported missing, Brian Walshe was formally charged with murder and improper disposal of a body. The charge marked a decisive shift. Law enforcement was no longer searching for a missing woman. They were pursuing a homicide case. In the courtroom, the prosecution detailed their timeline. They alleged that Ana was killed sometime after midnight on January 1st, that her phone stopped transmitting data shortly after, that Brian's movements in the following days, trips to Home Depot, trips to dumpsters, inconsistent statements, were part of an effort to conceal the crime. They emphasized the digital searches as evidence of premeditation or at least immediate intent to cover up a killing. How to dispose of a body. How long does it take for a body to decompose in cold weather? Best ways to dispose of a body. The repetition of those phrases carried its own weight. The defense, at this stage, maintained that the prosecution's case was built entirely on circumstantial evidence. They emphasized the lack of a body, the lack of direct proof. They argued that searches alone do not prove action. That behavior, even suspicious behavior, does not equal murder beyond a reasonable doubt. But public opinion began hardening. The image of Ana, professional, poised, mother of three, contrasted sharply with the disturbing allegations emerging in court. And then there was the basement. Investigators alleged that blood evidence had been found in that area of the home, including on items later recovered from dumpsters. The prosecution stated that some trash bags contained materials with blood matching Ana's DNA profile. Yet again, the body itself remained missing. It is one thing to allege dismemberment. It is another to prove it without remains. The legal battle would hinge on whether the jury could connect digital intent with physical evidence strongly enough to eliminate reasonable doubt. As weeks turned into months, Ana's disappearance transformed into a case study in modern forensic investigation. How digital footprints can reconstruct a timeline even when a body is absent. But beneath the forensic complexity lay something simpler. 3 children no longer had their mother. Their home became a crime scene. Their routines disrupted. Their names largely shielded from media coverage, but their reality altered permanently. The prosecution painted a portrait of calculated concealment. They alleged that Brian Walshe attempted to mislead investigators from the beginning, first by claiming Ana left for the airport, then by offering partial explanations for his movements. They pointed to his previous fraud conviction as evidence of a pattern of deception. The defense would argue that past wrongdoing does not equate to present guilt. The case moved slowly through the legal system. Hearings, motions, evidence disclosures. Each procedural step built toward a trial that would need to answer one fundamental question. Can you convict someone of murder when the victim's body has never been found? By the time the charges were formalized, the initial image of a missing mother boarding a plane had dissolved. In its place stood a far darker narrative, one shaped by search histories in the quiet hours of the night, by cleaning supplies purchased under fluorescent store lights, by trash bags recovered from dumpsters miles away. Yet uncertainty remained. Because even with all the alleged evidence laid out in court, one fact persisted like a shadow. No one had found Ana Walshe. Her physical absence lingered over every allegation, over every search term read aloud, over every forensic claim. The case was moving toward trial, toward witnesses taking the stand, toward cross-examinations, toward a jury that would have to sit with the digital searches, the blood evidence, the missing body, and decide whether the story the prosecution constructed was the only reasonable explanation. As pretrial hearings continued, one thing became clear. This would not be a case defined solely by what was found. It would be defined by what was missing. And when the courtroom doors finally opened for trial, the weight of that absence would settle over every seat. Because the most haunting piece of evidence in the Ana Walshe case was not a photograph, not a search term, not a recovered tool. It was the silence where her body should have been. And the question that would confront the jury was as stark as it was unsettling. Is absence itself enough to prove what happened in the early hours of January 1st? The courtroom felt smaller than expected. Not physically smaller, but emotionally compressed, as if the air itself had weight. The benches were filled with reporters, legal observers, and members of the public who had followed the case from the beginning. At the center of it all sat the man accused of killing his wife. Ana Walshe was not there. She would never sit in that courtroom. Her presence existed only in photographs entered into evidence. Images of her smiling, poised, professional. Images of her holding her children. Images taken long before New Year's Eve 2022 turned into something irreversible. The Commonwealth of Massachusetts charged Brian Walshe with murder, misleading investigators, and improper disposal of a body. He had previously been indicted following his arrest weeks after Anna's disappearance. Now the formal process of proving the case began. There was still no body. And that fact hung over the courtroom like a second defendant. The prosecution opened by laying out a narrative of calculated violence followed by methodical concealment. They did not claim eyewitnesses. They did not present surveillance of a killing. What they offered instead was a mosaic: digital searches, forensic findings, movements caught on camera, and inconsistencies in Brian Walshe's statements. They returned to the searches first. Jurors were shown timestamps. Early morning hours of January 1st. How long before a body starts to smell? How to stop a body from decomposing? How to dispose of a 115-pound woman's body? The prosecution emphasized that these searches occurred inside the home, before Ana was reported missing, and during the window of time when Brian claimed she had left for the airport. They argued that the searches demonstrated consciousness of guilt, preparation for concealment. But they also acknowledged what they could not show. There was no direct video of Ana being harmed. No recovered remains. No autopsy report. Instead, they relied on forensic testimony. Experts testified about blood evidence recovered from the basement of the Cohasset home. They described patterns consistent, in the prosecution's view, with attempts to clean. They discussed DNA testing on items recovered from dumpsters, trash bags containing materials that, according to court records, matched Anna's DNA profile. A hacksaw, a hatchet, towels, cleaning supplies. The prosecution argued that these items, discarded in separate trash locations across neighboring towns, formed part of a deliberate effort to dismantle and dispose of evidence. Approximately 500 words into the trial's unfolding narrative, one detail resurfaced with renewed force: the timeline. Prosecutors reconstructed Brian Walshe's movements through surveillance footage and phone data. They alleged that after Anna's disappearance, he traveled to Home Depot to purchase cleaning supplies. That he made multiple trips to dumpsters in the days following January 1st. That his account of taking his child for ice cream did not align with the locations recorded. They argued that these actions were not the behavior of a worried husband, but of someone attempting to erase a crime. The defense approached the case differently. They focused on the absence. They reminded jurors that suspicion is not proof. That disturbing internet searches do not equal murder. That circumstantial evidence requires careful scrutiny. They questioned the chain of custody of certain items. They examined whether contamination or misinterpretation could explain some forensic findings. Most importantly, they returned repeatedly to the fact that Anna's body had never been found. No body means no definitive cause of death. No body means no way to determine exactly when or how she died. No body means the possibility, however remote, that something else occurred. The defense did not need to prove an alternative story. They needed only to argue that the prosecution's story was not proven beyond reasonable doubt. The courtroom oscillated between technical testimony and emotional gravity. Friends and colleagues of Ana described her dedication to her children and career. They spoke about her scheduled return to Washington, her responsibilities at work, her communication patterns. They described her as someone unlikely to disappear voluntarily. The prosecution used that testimony to reinforce their position. Ana did not leave by choice. Approximately halfway through the trial, another weighty element surfaced: financial strain. Prosecutors presented evidence suggesting tension over money. They referenced Brian Walshe's prior federal conviction for art fraud and his pending sentencing at the time of Anna's disappearance. They argued that Ana had been the primary financial support for the family and that pressure was mounting. They suggested motive. The defense countered that financial difficulty is not murder. That marital tension, even severe tension, does not equal homicide. They cautioned jurors against letting past wrongdoing color present judgment. The jury listened. They saw photographs of the home. They reviewed search histories. They examined timelines minute by minute. And through it all, Ana remained physically absent. Another 500 words into the narrative of trial proceedings, the emotional center of the case shifted toward the children. Their names were largely withheld from public discourse, shielded from exposure. But their existence underscored every argument. 3 young boys who had lost their mother. 3 children whose father now faced life in prison. The courtroom, despite its procedural tone, could not escape that reality. When closing arguments arrived, the prosecution urged jurors to see the totality. They argued that each piece of evidence, on its own, might not tell the full story. But together they formed a coherent picture. They described a killing followed by calculated dismemberment and disposal. They pointed to digital searches as evidence of planning or immediate intent to conceal. They framed Brian Walsh's inconsistent statements as consciousness of guilt. The defense urged restraint. They emphasized that the prosecution's case was built without a body, that it relied heavily on inference, that jurors must resist filling in gaps with assumption. The verdict, when it came, carried the weight of absence. Brian Walshe was convicted of murder and improper disposal of a body. The sentence reflected the seriousness of the conviction. Yet even at sentencing, the central paradox remained. There was no body. The judge acknowledged the gravity of the crime and the impact on Anna's family. The courtroom heard victim impact statements. Family members expressed grief, confusion, and a sense of irreversible loss. But closure, the kind that comes with finality, felt incomplete. Because no grave could be visited. No remains could be laid to rest. The legal system delivered its conclusion. The emotional reality was more complex. In the months and years that followed, the absence of Anna's body continued to define the case. It became a point of public fascination and quiet sorrow. Some asked whether her remains would ever be found. Others focused on the broader implications, how digital evidence has transformed modern prosecutions, how circumstantial cases can still meet the burden of proof. For her children, the case is not theoretical. It is personal. They will grow up with a mother who vanished and a father convicted of causing that disappearance. They will inherit not only memories, but a narrative shaped by court transcripts and news archives. And then there is the question that lingers long after verdicts are read. Where is she? The woods around Cohasset have been searched. The dumpsters examined. The home processed. Years may pass without an answer. The law can assign guilt. It can impose punishment. But it cannot always recover what was lost. In the end, the Ana Walshe case is defined not only by what prosecutors presented or what jurors decided. It is defined by an empty space at a dinner table. By 3 boys who will remember their mother in fragments. By a New Year's Eve that no longer feels like celebration but rupture. A woman left home, or was said to have left, in the early hours of January 1st. She never arrived anywhere. The court reached its conclusion, but the earth has not yielded hers. And in that quiet, unresolved absence, the case continues to echo, not as a headline, not as a search term, but as a lingering silence where a life once was.